there, folks. How's it going?
Hello.
Wow. So what are we here to talk about today?
We're going to be talking about how the city of Santa Rosa used some data and some help to respond to the firestorm from October.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, let's kind of jump into the wildfire story, as it were. I believe it was a Saturday back in October of last year that I got a call from Eric McHenry, your CIO, and he had said that they were dealing with some of the responses to the wildfires, and if Socrata was able to help in any way. I said just straight up, yes, Eric, if you need any kind of help in any way whatsoever, we're here for you.
Right, I think that was sort of the mode of the evening. So my name is Jake, I work for the city of Santa Rosa, and the first thing that I had to do when that fire happened was get out of the house and drive down to the EOC. And one of the things that we initially had to do was figure out the magnitude of the problem, and immediately we realized that we were in over our heads and we needed to ask for help. While we were able to manage the crisis and the incident itself, when it came to leaning on outside industry and the private sector, we literally put calls out to everybody that we knew, and Socrata was one of the first that stepped up and helped by creating a new little product.
Absolutely. But just to give folks in the audience a little bit of an idea of what kind of, what magnitude of scale were we dealing with in that November fire, or rather October fire?
Right, so you can see on the screen here there were 27 lives lost in the Tubbs and Nunn fires, which spanned most of Sonoma County, or spanned across Sonoma County and into Napa County. 7,000 structures total destroyed, 4,000 vehicles destroyed. This was something that put together, sum total, was about 90,000 acres. 90,000 acres were decimated by the fire. And to put that in scale, the city and county of San Francisco is 30,000 acres. So it was 3 times the size in total of the city and county of San Francisco. It was a big deal.
And in terms of the sheer scale of evacuations that you had to undertake at the city, can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, how many people within the city itself had to be removed from their homes as the fires were advancing on the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma?
Right. In preparation for this, I did a little bit of research to get the numbers. This was fascinating for me too. That in the city of Santa Rosa, so the fire of course stretched across the unincorporated Sonoma County and also impacted Santa Rosa. You can see it on the map there. The red dots that you see on the map, probably 2/3 of those are within city limits. And so I asked our GIS analyst to come up with some parcel information. There are about 56,000 parcels in the incorporated city limits of Santa Rosa. During the height of the evacuations, 24,000 of those parcels were impacted. And so roughly 45% of the population of Santa Rosa was evacuated from their homes, whether they lost them or not, for about a week, and some people obviously a lot longer. The county of Sonoma is about 500,000 people, 100,000 of whom were evacuated for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and actually using data to figure out who needed to be evacuated was something you were describing to me earlier on. This was stuff that was coming into the Emergency Operations Center by the minute, and you had to make modifications and changes to the evacuation schedule with realities happening on the ground. And it was interesting you telling me how that data was actually getting in and out to the field. It would be coming in on the radio, you'd be drawing out the fire lines on the map, and then we'd be using, or you all would be using that map to then inform the GIS team to build the layers, to then try to get all of the parcels evacuated. So it was a really interesting kind of data flow exercise that you were talking about.
Right, right. My job with the city of Santa Rosa is a programmer analyst, and so I get to dabble with a lot of the database and information that's going in. My role at the EOC, however, was working the public information officer's desk. And so it was hard for me not to step away from the PIO table to go and have a look at how the radio was informing the dry erase map on the wall. And then that was being put into GIS. And then we were getting the GIS map and trying to push it out as quickly as we could to the public with the internet, social media, TV, radio, etc. So that was the life cycle of data was all very compressed in that one room.
Yeah, and we'll be able to talk with a little more clarity about how you were able to actually disseminate this from a public information officer standpoint, how you're able to engage other actors in the area, you know, the press, other community services, so that you can actually share this out within a variety of different networks to be able to address the issue of who needs to be evacuated and when.
Right.
But just to give you all an idea of kind of what the realities were on the ground and how this ended up actually looking in a kind of visual interface, Anybody know what this is? What they're looking at right now?
The person who took this picture was not drunk. All right, I'll tell a quick story. When I got called to the EOC, the fire was exploding. It had begun in the city of Calistoga, or the town of Calistoga in Napa County, and was being blown by 80-mile-an-hour winds over the hill and coming over towards Santa Rosa. As I came in, and I live a bit outside of town, it takes me a while to get to work, and reporting to the EOC was no different. As I merged onto southbound Highway 101, was the very moment that the fire was being blown across Highway 101 and into the Coffee Park neighborhood. This is a picture of me. I'm probably the 6th or 8th car who got to a wall of just blackout smoke and fire and realized the cars that turned around and were coming the wrong way on Highway 101 weren't drunk. They were actually trying to escape the fire blowing across the highway. And so I did a U-turn. Everybody was, put their flashers on. And I thought, nobody's going to believe me. I have to take a picture. So I pulled my camera out and gingerly took a picture of southbound traffic as I was going northbound in the fast lane on Highway 101 to try and escape the flames in order to get to the EOC. So this was a crazy, crazy moment. It still kind of gives me chills as I tell the story.
Yeah, not exactly something that you see every day, particularly not on the California.
No, this is not something that I expected to do that day, no.
But to kind of give everybody an idea of just the sheer scale of destruction that we were experiencing here, we said 7,000 units were destroyed within the city of Santa Rosa.
7,000 units within the county, Sonoma County. Inside the city of Santa Rosa, it was closer to 3,000.
Yeah. Yep. But I mean, as you can see here, just this is taken from a helicopter surveying the area after the fact. Right. Entire neighborhoods were just leveled.
Right, this neighborhood is called the Larkfield neighborhood, and the fire, you probably all have seen in the news at some point sort of the description of how quickly this fire moved. It was going so fast that all of our emergency services were doing door-to-door evacuations and life and limb safety rather than try to protect the structures for quite a few hours. It wasn't until probably 3 or 4 or 5 the next morning that they actually got to do firefighting because they had managed to get everybody evacuated that they needed to get evacuated.
Yeah, and it wasn't just isolated to one single neighborhood. You had entire neighborhoods just be absolutely leveled, and there were some videos being searched on social media at the time where you had fire engines coming in from as far away as Berkeley, showing up to their staging point where they were told to protect a Kmart, only to find that Kmart was actually itself burning to the ground. Right. So the fire was fast-moving, emergency service had to act pretty rapidly, and being able to use a lot of the kind of multiple different streams of data that you're gathering in real time, then conveying that out to the public was something that is crucial.
Well, in fact, one of the things that Elliot and I have talked about over the course of the last couple of days, just doing a little bit of preparation for this, is how relevant the social media was for us. That some of those videos of the fire departments as they were moving along and posting to social media, those were things that we were finding in the EOC to be very useful, because at that point, we really didn't have any intelligence about specifically what had burned and what hadn't. We knew what because of the way EOCs work, the operations center, they deal with all the communications. They know precisely what's going on. But by the time it got to the Public Information Office, we knew generalities. We knew this area had burned and we knew this area needed to be evacuated. The specificity that we got through social media was something that I think for the next event, whatever it might be, whether it's a flood or a fire or an earthquake or who knows what it's going to be, trying to have something in place so that we can measure the incoming data of social media is going to be tremendously useful. So Absolutely. That's something that we learned from it in the heat of it.
Yeah.
Pun not intended.
And to kind of, that was just kind of set the stage for how we first got in touch with the city of Santa Rosa. We, at Socrata, had developed an application called Find a Shelter. And what the intention of this application was to be able to provide folks the ability to search for open FEMA shelters that was being published on FEMA's GIS server, bring that data into a map interface that was going to be available on their mobile devices. We'll talk about mobile devices a lot later, but this was really to be able to provide individuals who were evacuating from something like Hurricanes Irma, Hurricanes Maria, be able to point them in the right direction towards shelters that were open or as they were opening up, We also wanted to provide them not with just the location, but a little information about this location they're heading to as well. As you can see here, you have capacity counts and population counts as well, so that you'll be able to know if I'm heading to the one that is closest to me, the likelihood that I'll be able to get in there might be low or high depending on how many people are actually currently in that shelter. Right. And that was something, a tool that we were able to share out to Eric, and then Eric was able to share it out with other folks within the city and the county to point people in the right direction and be able to get them to shelter as quickly as possible. And the great thing about this application was that it was very easily transportable from kind of a web interface standpoint. So you had local news outlets like the Sacramento Bee actually picking up this map, and when they're talking about evacuation shelters and where you need to be going, you can actually then put this into their website, or they themselves put this into their website, and we're able to tell people, hey, you need resources, you need to know where to go. Just look at this map that we have created and that we're sharing out to the public. And we saw a lot of traffic and as part of our Google Analytics coming in from sites like the Sacramento Bee or the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat.
Right. Right. The local media were instrumental in picking up the information that the Public Information Office desk was putting out, not just the Santa Rosa, but also the County of Sonoma. As you know, the fire spanned both of them, and of course the people who were evacuating from the city of Santa Rosa didn't necessarily care where the geographic boundary was between the city and the county. They just needed to find shelter for that night. Mm-hmm. And so having something like this that spanned those boundaries really helped a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting hearing after the fact the decisions that were made to engage with media on this outlet from kind of some of the legal and compliance standpoint.
Right.
Because you couldn't have government entities pointing people in that direction.
Right. So how many, quick show of hands, how many of you work for a government agency? How many of you have a legal department, perhaps a city attorney who might be a little bit conservative about how you might share or recommend information for your constituents and where they might go and find a place to live or to rent, right? So that's exactly what happened. We stood, with Socrata's help, we stood up this platform to try and make it easy for the public to have a place to live. And within a few days, started to get questions from the city attorney's office about the legality and the ramifications of the city of Santa Rosa telling the public, hey, you should go and look at Airbnb for a place to stay, or you should go look at some of these other places. And so the verdict ultimately was the city needed to take down because we needed to not be endorsing these places that we don't control. But the beauty of it was the way that it can be embedded in the press pages or any of the other, as you might imagine, there were a lot of community efforts to try and help people out during the fires, whether it was fundraising, trying to find places for them to stay, and any resources. And so there were some websites, Facebook and websites where the local hack community had put together these pages where they embedded this. And so this tool, while it was pulled together by the government agency, we realized that we couldn't actually endorse things. We were able to hand it off, and the public and the community was still able to use it after the fact. Things were moving very fast.
Yeah. Things were changing by the minute, as it were. But that was actually the first engagement that we had with Eric and with you all at the city of Santa Rosa. He said, yeah, that's great. We're really glad that we can now get people to shelter, but we've got a much bigger problem we've got to address. As part of the kind of general housing landscape in the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma, there already existed a shortage in housing stock even before the fires themselves. So now that you have about 7,000 units taken off the market, that creates a much bigger problem that would need to be solved. And that's where Eric said that he needed to have our help in securing short-term rentals, Airbnb type places, even hip camp. People needed to find camping sites to be able to sleep for a few nights as soon as they evacuated from their houses. Yeah,
we were fortunate during the almost the entire month of October was rain-free in Sonoma County. So a lot of the people who had to evacuate just said, what the heck, let's go camping. And all of the campgrounds in Sonoma County were absolutely packed. And so that was another way that we took up the pressure.
Yeah. So as you can see here, I mean, this is just the orange being the number of houses needing to be rebuilt. You just see that problem. It was
Right, so now what's happening is we've gotten through the initial phase of this crisis, and now we're starting to deal with the long-term ramifications of this, where Sonoma County didn't have enough housing for its population before the fires, and now that, I know the statistic in Santa Rosa anyway, is that fully 5% of the number of houses in Santa Rosa were destroyed. So 5% of the population presumably has no place to live or has to find an alternative and probably has to look at rebuilding. And so it's a massive crisis. And I think now, using some of this data, we're trying to figure out how to solve that. Part of the reason that I'm here and my boss, Eric McHenry, the CTO, isn't here is because he is presenting this week to the Santa Rosa City Council as part of their budget discussions. One of the myriad things that City Council is having to grapple with is needing to replace an entire water system for the Fountain Grove neighborhood to the tune of about $45 or $50 million. And how they're going to find that, where the general fund reserves are only around $10 or $11 million, is anybody's guess. Maybe we'll get state help.
Hopefully. But in that same vein of actually being able to provide people with more long-term housing, this was another application that we helped stand up in partnership with other private sector enterprises like Airbnb, Zillow, HipCamp, where people actually looking to find where to relocate temporarily in the locality of Santa Rosa would be able to go to sponsored websites like the government-sponsored websites like the Sonoma County Recovers website seen here, look for the area they needed to go to and be able to find all of the different available housing stock, or at least short-term housing stock that you have available here, and then be able to jump to that website itself and be able to engage with the rental property owners so they could actually start to relocate quicker and find a nation that they needed.
Yeah, I think for those of you who are sitting in the room or watching at home or at work, I'm sure some of you are going to be impacted by a crisis. Hopefully it's not a terrible crisis. Hopefully you can get out unscathed. But the beauty of this kind of thing is that we realized early that we needed to ask for help. And I would encourage all of you to think about that too. How can Socrata help? How can Google help? How can Amazon help? And it turns out everybody stepped up, and a lot of amazing things that we're not going to be able to cover in the short time that we have here happened also. And so put that little feather in your cap and consider.
And I was also significantly impressed by just the amount of your governmental partners in other areas outside of Santa Rosa actually kind of drove in to the EOC and showed up. And They were able to help you all alleviate some of that burden of having to deal with the crisis on your own. They showed up willingly on the weekend to be able to jump in and actually help you all deal with some of the problems you were dealing with.
Right. For the first 2 weeks of this crisis, the fire wasn't contained until October 30th, 31st, and so it lasted about 3 weeks where the fire was still active and there were still areas that people couldn't go to because it was burning, not just because the neighborhood had burned. And I had an opportunity to work with a lot of those people who came from Los Angeles and Santa Barbara and Ventura and San Francisco and Marin. I had no idea how many people come from all over the place in order to help during an EOC activation.
Yeah, that was, I wasn't actually down at EOC, but even just being remote and hearing the kind of inflow government workers who actually came to help at the EOC was just very inspiring to hear.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. We'll shift gears a little bit to kind of talk about some of the lessons learned that you saw because of the disaster that you experienced in last October. What I found really interesting is just the amount of traffic that you had to deal with, and that the qualities related to that traffic and how that changed over the crisis itself.
Right, so on the screen there, just scrolling up, is the number of page views that srcity.org has had over the course of the last 8 or 10 years. And there's a big peak there you can see on the far right side. That peak is the October firestorm. And just to rattle a couple of numbers, on an average day, I actually checked this morning to confirm, on any average weekday, there are about 20 or 25 active users on srcity.org at any given moment during the daytime. During the fire, probably at 4 or 5 in the morning was when, on Monday, October 9th, was when I first went to Google Analytics to go see what was happening website. And of course, they have some awesome real-time tools. There were more than 2,000 simultaneous active users at srcity.org, such that it really started to bog the website down, and we were able to call our partner who hosts that, Civic Plus, and they applied a few more machines to it and scaled it up so that we could meet that need. What you're seeing on these here, and I'm sure we'll let this scroll through a couple of times, that I learned that was fascinating, that instinctually I knew was probably the case, because I've been watching Google Analytics for the city of Santa Rosa for a long time, is that on any average day, there's probably 60% of the users who are on the website, customers looking for information, wonky people, they're using desktops. 40% is roughly the number of people who use mobile. And that flip-flop, that actually was completely the opposite during the fire itself, is that when people were out, they were evacuating, they were looking for information, the path of least resistance was the phone in their pocket. That was something that I think all of us probably know it makes sense, and it's absolutely true.
Yeah. And one of the things that was interesting that you were telling me is that navigation on the mobile interface needs to be optimized to actually be able to accommodate that new influx of users who are interacting with the platform in a way that is not designed for the desktop environment.
Right.
And that's something that you all had to constantly iterate upon during the actual EOC activation itself. And I remember Carrie actually jumping in and saying that she was going to help redesign the actual user flow so that it would be much more user-friendly to be accessed from a mobile device.
Yeah, it worked out. For the first few days, we had an emergency information landing page that the Public Information Office desk was managing, where we would have links to PDF maps about the evacuation zones, links that go out to the Socrata app to look for an evacuation center, look for housing. That wound up becoming a very long web page. I would say, it's probably 3 or 4 paper pages pasted together. Had to get really creative with trying to find ways on the fly to consolidate that so that it would be more mobile friendly. Yeah. And that's a lesson that we learned that we're going to have in place for the next inevitability.
Yep, absolutely. But moving beyond just the actual October timeframe, y'all have been really effective at actually using data to communicate how you've been recovering since the fires happened itself. Being able to talk about how you're rebuilding and what actions you're taking, and then being able to update that in real time is something that, in talking with you and Eric, is really interesting to see how that engages the public.
Yeah. A number that I saw this morning is that approximately $8 billion in insurance money is what's coming into the County because of the fires. And how that insurance money is going to be used in the permitting and the rebuilding process is just kind of an idea. It gives you a look into the magnitude of the measuring that we have to do for all of this coming up. Yep.
Yeah, and seeing, these stories come in, just the amount of debris removal and the additional services that either private enterprise or the city or county has to provide as part of this is something that has been fascinating to watch as it's been coming in.
Yeah, something that I didn't expect was that when FEMA got involved in this whole process, they took over management of the debris removal and cleanup process. And so I think already, now that we're just barely more than 6 months away from this, FEMA, working with the county and the city, has already cleaned up something like 98 or 99% of all of those 7,000 parcels that had houses on them that were burned, which has been an amazing thing to watch. It's been so fast.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly fast timescale when you think about the fires on the city.
Yeah.
But just because you are done with the immediate response to the fire, it doesn't seem like y'all are quite there or even close to being there.
No, we're in the throes of it. That this, I think, this is going to be a very, very long road ahead. It's going to take a long time to rebuild everything. And the things that we're thinking about right now, about how we're capturing information about what's going on, are addressing the housing needs, right? There are a lot of people who still don't have a place to live, or who are living in Airbnbs that were sort of retooled to become emergency shelters, and they're going to be looking for a place. The workforce transition has been amazing to watch too, that over the course of the last 6 months, there have been thousands of dump trucks and excavators going to all of those home sites and removing their foundations and all the hazardous material and taking it all to the landfills and the recyclers. That was a tremendous pressure on our road infrastructure. And now that they're gone, we have to think about the impacts on the road infrastructure and the housing and the rental and the hotel market, because we have 7,000 homes to rebuild. And where are those construction crews going to come from? And where are they going to stay when they're here?
Yeah, and also, I mean, just the decreased lifespan of the assets you're talking about with the roads. I mean, you're also going to have to figure out, like you said earlier, how to rebuild an entire electrical grid that got scorched as part of the fires rolling through an area, or even the new water lines have to be installed because that system is no longer safe for that area to be able to be in operation.
Right.
And then finally, you're talking how the budget needs to be impacted and be able to, understand what data you have that you can make better decisions for that budgeting process, like Eric is currently doing right now.
Yep,
Yeah.
those are super important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are opening it up to Q&A right now. If you all have any questions about the response, how Santa Rosa and Sonoma County have been using data in their response to the fire itself, we'd love to hear from you all if you have any questions for myself or for Jake here.
We answered every question. Oh, wow, that's a data point that I probably should have looked up. No, I don't know the answer to that.
The traffic that we saw from people going to that from a variety of different sources during the week following the initial deployment was about 70,000 users. So it's a pretty significant number of people actually using that to be able to find whatever shelter they could or whatever shelter was available to them.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah.
So now that you've gone through this, knowing that something will occur at some point in the future, anything that you might kind of just preload and have ready to roll that other jurisdictions might be able to kind of learn from and say, okay, how do I build my EOC operation so I can deploy quickly in these types of cases?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the thought process that's going through the minds of everybody who worked in the EOC. They're certainly, one of the things that I was doing as this whole thing was happening was taking some note of what things were missing, what would be really helpful to have right now, whether that just be an image repository or a Slack iteration or something like that. I think that is precisely the thing that we're trying to get our hands on right now. And having everything sort of fresh in our memory is helpful, but it doesn't change the fact that it's a challenge. There isn't a turnkey solution, Up here in the front. You should wait for the mic just because. Here it comes.
So there's also software called WebEC. You're familiar with that?
Yeah.
And I know that can integrate with other related software. Have you thought about any kind of connection between WebEC and the Socrata tool in this, or have you?
That's interesting.
Were these used in totally two independent ways?
I think that the county of Sonoma may WebEC. There's a couple of folks here from the county that may know the answer to that. Kevin, do you know whether Sonoma County uses WebEC or not?
I think we do.
Yeah, I think that maybe you do. The city of Santa Rosa had a home-built sort of SharePoint content management system with most of our EOC events that were digitized, so to try and ease that process. It certainly helped as a repository, but as a functional sort of messaging system, which WebEOC really is, it fell a little bit short. And so I think what we're doing right now, actually the city of Santa Rosa is in the middle of an RFP to find a new EOC software platform, but we don't use WebEOC right now. Yeah. Any other questions? I'd be happy to talk with anybody afterwards. I'm sure Elliot would too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.